All right. I apologize about this morning with the Zoom. We just covered some different things with different weather terms and things associated with weather. So I'm going to do just a quick review with you here. Nothing due today, so don't worry about that. You don't have to turn anything in, so nobody got any extra credit points or anything like that. So let's go through some things that we learned and we talked about today with the water cycle. First and foremost, we did mention the sun quite often. We said not only is the sun the number one source of energy for the water cycle, we said that the sun was the number one source of energy in the ecosystems. It's what gives plants the energy to make their own food through photosynthesis. It is what powers the water cycle through causing evaporation and giving off that heat energy. It's what causes winds around the earth because of the unequal heating of the earth's surface. It's because of the way the earth is shaped. It's why the earth is hotter at the equator. And we have seasons at the middle latitudes and it's cold at the poles. So the sun came up quite often today. But since we're talking about the water cycle, it is the beginning of the water cycle, so to say, because it's the main source of energy. And it's what it does is it really starts two processes on Earth that are going to get water up into the atmosphere. And one of the things is it does is it heats up plants. And plants are kind of like us. When we get hot outside, we sweat, and we do that in order to cool off. Plants go through a very similar process called transpiration. We lose water through our skin. Plants lose water through their quote-unquote skin, through their leaves. That water is then evaporated and moved off through convection, and that cools the plants off. And that water goes up into the atmosphere. Now, that may not make a huge difference in the tiny little forest behind our school, but in a massive rainforest on the equator, it puts quite a bit of water back into the atmosphere. The other thing that the sun does is it causes evaporation. Obviously, seeing that the earth is covered with a majority of water, evaporation is something that happens on a daily basis, especially when the sun is outside and shining. So we are glad that the sun is doing its job. Evaporation, we need to dig a little bit deeper into. That's when water changes from a liquid to a gas, evaporation. So water changes to a vapor. And what happens to that is we know that hot air rises, and so does hot water vapor, and it rises up into the atmosphere. Now, as it's rising up in the atmosphere, we know that for a certain amount of time, it gets cooler and cooler as we go up in the atmosphere, and that water vapor starts to lose its heat energy. And as it starts to lose the heat energy, the molecules start to slow down more and more. And when those molecules slow down enough, they turn from a vapor back into a tiny, tiny little droplets of liquid, and we call that condensation. And we know that condensation is cloud formation. And again, once we have enough evaporation and we have enough condensation and all those teeny tiny little water droplets start to kind of bump into each other, much like they do on the mirror and the wind on the bathroom, when those little droplets bump into each other enough, they become big enough water droplets that they fall. They fall down the mirror, or they're going to fall out of the clouds. Now, once we've had condensation, which is cloud formation, happen, and the water starts to fall from the clouds, we're going to have something called precipitation. Do remember that condensation, evaporation are all physical changes. It's still water. I can change everything back into its original state if I want to. It's not made a new substance. It's still molecules of water if you look at it under a microscope. Precipitation, the four main types of precipitation are rain, sleet, snow, and hail. Those are any type of water that falls from the atmosphere back to the earth, and that's how the water that has been evaporated makes its way back to the earth. Whether it's one of these or the other really has something to do with the temperature and the time of year it is. Obviously, we just seen the season of snow and sleet. I think we're moving into the season of rain, and it won't be much longer till it's super hot outside, and we could possibly have hail, which occurs and during pretty strong thunderstorms and very tall cumulonimbus clouds with extremely strong updrafts. And we talked about updrafts last week. When the rain hits the ground and it runs off of the earth and it runs into lakes, rivers, streams, and ponds, that is something that we call runoff. And that's actually easy to remember because what water runs off the top of the ground into a lake or a pond or a river or a stream, it's called runoff. Runoff is pretty easy. But we also know that, especially in North Carolina, when enough water hits the ground, it eventually can't do anything but run off because some of the water has seeped down into the ground. Now, I would say that our ground water is pretty full at this point. All these little areas down in the soil are full. And so water has to kind of run off. It just sits there on top. And I know that there for a long time, like our ground was like unbelievably saturated. We had to miss recess like weeks and weeks and weeks on end outside because you just couldn't even stand in the grass without sinking like 2 or 3 inches and your foot being soaked. There was nowhere else for the water to go. All of this was soaked. We're starting to see some of that recede as we've had some of these more sunny days outside where some more evaporation can happen and some drying up of these things happen. No, we're not anywhere near like drought levels where the ground is completely parched and dry and there's no water in the creeks. We're still well above where we need to be in water, but that's not necessarily a bad thing to have groundwater. Anywhere that water runs off, and if it runs off into a pond, it runs off into a stream, it forms a puddle, and water is collecting, we call that collection. So anywhere that you see water collecting, that could be the ocean, that could be a pond, it could be a lake, river, stream, or a puddle, that is going to be collection. That's all we're going to do for today. It's a quick little 6-minute video. We just spent some time talking about that, and we went over it and over and over in class, but I'm not going to spend an hour and a half talking about the same thing over and over and over again. Just make sure you know these terms because the odds of water cycle questions popping up on the benchmark are rather huge. All right, kiddos, that's it for today. Take it easy. Don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe, and we will see you later.